It was 3 weeks before I got around to making a GP appointment after finding a strange lump but a thickening in my left breast. The delay was partly because I couldn't find time for an appointment and also because I didn't think it was anything to worry about. However, this all changed during the GP visit. I had not been concerned whatsoever until during her examination she felt that a hospital referral was necessary under the 2-week cancer procedure. 2-week cancer procedure? I thought, cancer? Now I was worried. I remember leaving the surgery and 2 weeks before I got around to making a GP appointment after finding a strange lump, sort of like a thickening in my left breast. I was delayed partly because I couldn't find time for an appointment and also because I didn't think there was anything to worry about. However, this all changed during the GP visit. I'd not been concerned whatsoever until during her examination she felt that I needed to be referred to the hospital under the 2-week cancer procedure. Cancer, I was really concerned, and the word cancer had been mentioned, and I thought, what? And I remember leaving the surgery, bursting into tears. I wasn't prepared for that response whatsoever. And now I had to take into the fact that I could have cancer. I didn't tell many people, and I threw myself into my work and looking after my 3 children. 2 weeks seemed to go on forever, and I didn't eat very much, and I didn't go out with anybody, and my interest, I wasn't socialising with friends. I spent hours on the internet researching about breast cancer, and this did nothing to make me feel any better at all. And also, at that time, my mother was ill with early onset dementia, and she was getting worse by the day, so that was more to worry about. Anyway, finally, I had my appointment at Lewisham Hospital Breast Unit. I remember going in there, it was horrible, it was run down, and the environment was really old, and it did nothing to help people relax, those of us that were waiting to see the specialist. And I still, when I think about it, I still really hate that place. And before I was called in to see the surgeon, I remember running to the toilet to throw up. That's how nervous I was. I was literally worried sick. Well, that soon changed when during my breast examination he told me that he didn't think there was anything to worry about, but would send me for a mammogram anyway while I was there. First time in ages I relaxed. I felt so relieved by what he'd said. He just wanted me to go upstairs to the X-ray department, get the X-rays and bring them back to him before he left the clinic. I waited for 2 hours, had several very painful breast X-rays, and I brought the films back to the specialist. However, the look on his face as he was studying them on the lighter screen in front of me told me that things were not okay. And when he called in the senior consultant to look at the pictures, I knew then that there was a problem with the mammogram. I felt sick again. They suspected there might be some calcification specks on my breast, early cancer, but they needed to send the X-rays away to be enlarged because it was really, really tiny. And in the meantime, I was referred for an ultrasound scan of my breast and a biopsy. I was to come back in a couple of weeks' time for the results. Well, literally, that was the worst 2 weeks of my life. I didn't tell many people as I wanted to get my results back first, but I couldn't eat, and I spent hours and hours on the internet looking at the different types of breast cancer and survival rates. I lost about a stone in weight during this time, as again I was worried sick. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping properly. I got support and encouragement from close friends, and I tried to carry on as normal for the sake of my 3 children. The thought of them not having a mother was the worst thought imaginable. They were 5, 9, and 14. So young. They needed their mum for many years yet, especially as I was their main carer. Although we were living with their dad, he could not be relied upon to provide them with all they needed. Not because he didn't love them, because he did, but he had a problem with alcohol, which dominated his life. Working as a lecturer also kept me going at this time, as I could forget about my own personal problems whilst at work. And maybe there was nothing to worry about, as I'd not actually been diagnosed with cancer at this point. There was a possibility that this was all a misunderstanding. No such luck. I was diagnosed with grade 3 invasive cancer, and to make matters worse, it was HER2, a particularly nasty type, and according to my internet research, had low survival rate. I needed a total mastectomy of my left breast, followed by 6 cycles of chemotherapy and 18 months of Herceptin. Wow. I was completely devastated. What would I tell my 3 children? How can a mother tell them that she has a life-threatening disease? So young and so innocent, it wasn't fair. I felt totally cheated by this diagnosis. Not only was her mother ill, but their grandmother had just been admitted to a care home as she was suffering from dementia, and my father could not look after her anymore. How was he going to cope with the news on top of everything else? So unfair. However, I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself, and certainly did not want anybody to feel sorry for me. So I decided I would be as normal as possible for my 3 children, and of course for my father. I told the children about my diagnosis. That was very difficult as I kept bursting into tears. But thank God for Kylie Minogue, as she had just gone through treatment for breast cancer. So I referred to her when I was telling them what was going to happen to me. I was going to lose my breast and my hair, but would be okay, just like Kylie. And I was. Those children gave me a reason to get up in the morning, to go to work, to face the pain and worry of losing my breast. They were there when I took my surgical dressing off and saw my flat chest and scar for the first time. Sharing this moment together made it easier for us all. Then came the chemotherapy. Again, we did this together. I was going to lose my hair, so I decided to cut it off before I started my treatment, and they were fine with this joint decision. When diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, you don't have many choices, but the choice that I was cutting my hair off before it fell out was rewarding and gave me a sense of empowerment, something that I could actually control. The chemo was unpleasant. As each cycle went on, I began to feel worse, but I had to carry on for my children. The older children accompanied me to these chemo appointments, and including them made it a bit more normal. They didn't have a sick mother. I didn't want them to have a sick mother. I wanted their mother to be the same as everyone else. So it became more difficult with each one, but I needed to be positive and get up and go on with my life to make the whole experience less of an issue. Yes, I was bald, but I was still getting on with things. I was going to work, and they were still attending school and going out with their friends, all as normal as possible. Very difficult to do this towards the last cycle. I was feeling so ill and so weak. My 3 wonderful children gave me an incentive to face cancer head on, and that's exactly what I did. No time to feel sorry for myself. I did not bother to wear my expensive new wig. No, didn't need it, as my bald head was accepted by them. And I did not need to get a new breast, any breast reconstruction, as again, they had no problem whatsoever that their mum only had 1 breast. They may have been really hurting inside, worried about me, but they never burdened me with this during my treatment. They too wanted everything to be normal. I know that I underwent treatment suggested by the medical profession, but my recovery was not only from this, but from the love and support given to me by my friends, but most of all from my kids. They were so young to be faced with such a terrible situation, but they dealt with it in such a mature and positive way. I could not have done it without them. At the time of diagnosis and during treatment, I prayed that I could get at least another 5 years of life to see my children grow up a little more. But here we are, 11 years later. Tough time, but lots of lessons learned on the way. Nothing can be taken for granted.
My parents, Maureen Draper and Brian Hughes, married at what we would think now to be far too young. They were both aged 18 and 19. My dad had almost completed his national service at the time, and my mum would often look back and regret the fact that she dated my dad while the bloke she was engaged to was doing his national service, the little ginger-haired guy. In retrospect, or hindsight, I should say, my mum always regretted the fact that she'd made that decision. Yeah, I think that regret would come out yearly. Seems the little ginger guy went off to do his 2-year compulsory service, and my dad swooped in. A family weren't too pleased with the arrangement, as both my dad's family and my mum's family had lived in the same gardens for decades and knew of each other, and it seems that my dad's family and his mum and the rest didn't have too good a name. They were considered a little bit like Scarlet Ladies. And shamefully, my nan, Elizabeth, gave birth to my dad out of wedlock. In fact, he never ever knew who his dad was, but it was suspected close family members knew, but it was kept a guarded secret. My nan and her sister were known locally as the Good Time Girls. I find it hard to recall how my dad looked during the early years of my childhood. I've got faint reflections of his presence round, which is likely due to my mum trying to maintain calm in the home whenever he was about. My dad didn't really communicate with us at all, other than short commands, usually consisting of keep still, sit down, stop coughing, get to your room. And if there was much more to it than that, I don't recall. I do remember watching him painstakingly nailing on individual plywood tiles to a doll's house he'd made for my older sister. And as young as I was, probably about 3 or 4-ish, I remember thinking, he must really love it to do that, because it takes so long. But I also remember consciously keeping a safe space between where I stood and where my dad was. I was aware I couldn't get too close, and I had to tread carefully and not talk too much, and definitely not get in the way. Looking back, I always wonder if it was these moments partly responsible for me only talking when I have something to say. My dad didn't talk about his childhood. He didn't recall stories of adventures, didn't recall anything going out with friends, being disciplined at school. And as we grew up, we gradually put together little snippets of information. My dad was raised by his nan up until the age of 12, but he believed that she was his mum. When his nan took ill, who he believed was his mum, he went looking for his sister, and he found his sister in bed with a man, doing the naughties. It was shortly after this that he found out that his sister was in fact his mum. But the memory of that time was a very, very bitter one. And he would often say how he found Lizzie in bed with a man when his mum died. Whether she died at the exact moment or whether she died later, no one knew, and you didn't ask questions. It wasn't something that could be approached. His relationship with Lizzie, as he called her, seemed to be one of duty. He always sent birthday and Christmas cards with the words Mum, not Mum, but Mum, M-O-M, and a formal greeting inside. He'd done minor repairs, he helped out with money, and she was included in family get-togethers where appropriate. I don't remember him being rude, judgmental, or saying things to her. In fact, I don't remember him having any substantial type of conversation with her at all. They were just short, two-worded answers. And my nanny accepted whatever he had to offer as a right and often expected more. And in turn, my nanny took on the nanny role, probably in the most basic form. When you go and call, she'd open the door, and then she'd come in, she'd give you a little bit of time, have a little chat, give you a cup of tea, make you a sandwich, which was always absolutely saturated in margarine, and the bits of filling that was inside would be slipping around and dropping out. And then usually she had a few questions about your mum and dad, which was normally the hint to find out as to whether they were home, as to whether she can go and get some money on them. She'd go, is your mum and dad at home? And then she'd just lift her head in acknowledgement of your answer. I quite loved my nan from afar, in a distant sort of way. She wasn't affectionate, but she used to buy really nice Christmas presents, like big Spanish dolls in cardboard boxes. And if there was any stuff going for sale and work which had fallen off the back of a lorry, she used to buy us bits of them as well. So if we were in her mind, she was thinking of us. In her own way, she was thinking of us, and in the way she knew how. During my teenage years, my mum would make saucy remarks about my nan in front of my dad. I don't know if it was to wind him up or whether she just didn't like her. Well, I know she didn't like her. And even if he agreed with her, he never said anything. He just remained silent and tut. My mum, on the other hand, was left motherless at the age of 8, along with her 2 younger siblings, Irene, aged 5 and 6, and Harry. Her mum died of bowel cancer, aged 28. So again, my mum was part raised by her dad and her nan. Her father, a docker, would get the children ready of a Monday, and he'd drop the kids off at the nan's while he went to do his work on the docks. And my mum would sit and talk for hours of times when she was a child of the tricks she got onto and the reasons they were told off and the arguments they would have and what mischief they got into. And while her nan became mum by default, she has to say how she felt she had 3 mothers, as her aunts would also be telling them off and looking after them, and their uncles. So she was actually quite protected. She'd tell tales of being at school, and she was often getting into trouble. Once she told us about sitting on the stairs and her granddad was talking to her. And then he turned around and he went, and just then Nan had got a telegraph at the door to say that her husband had been lost at sea on a submarine down in the North Sea. Dr. Draper, her dad, would then collect 3 kids of a Friday and then would spend the weekend with the dad, catching up on chores, and my mum's job was cleaning the brasses. My mum was tiny and scrawny, 4'11". But she was a little bit explosive, quite a little bundle of dynamite. She was fairly protective of her children and would take on literally anyone who would say anything about them. Even if her children were wrong, she would defend them to high heaven. Then once you got behind closed doors, that was a little bit of a different story. But to the rest of the world, she wouldn't. She'd protect the children. I can't picture my mum as a child, but I do remember her looking after Sharon as a baby. And I also remember her standing in the street for what seemed like an eternity, gossiping with friends. And I would tug there, being really bored and fed up, and I'd tug her sleeve and I'd tug off her arm and I'd be going, Mum, Mum, Mum. And then she'd politely say her goodbyes to her friends and smile and a little giggle and wish them well. And then before she'd done the full circle, she'd be yanking your arm up the hill and she'd be going, you make Holly show me like that again, and when I get in, I'll give you a hiding. Hiding was a smacking. She never did. It was just a threat, but she never ever gave us a smacking for stopping her from gossiping. She'd show a temper, but there was only a few occasions, if I think really hard, I can remember my mum hitting us. And it was usually done in frustration, as me and my brother Mark used to always fight constantly. And as we got bigger, we'd respond by picking her up and putting her in the hall. Or she'd take hold of our hands, you know, the way they used to do, and then pull it to one side so they can get to the back of your legs. But as she pulled us forward, we realised that if you just carried on running, you'd end up swinging around in circles. So while she initially wasn't happy, she ended up laughing in the end. And then come out another one of them idle threats. I'm telling your dad off you when you get home. She didn't do that either. I don't think my mum ever liked my dad. They were very much separate entities within the home. My dad would come home from work and the atmosphere would go black. And my mum, been chatty before, she'd take the hard chair and she'd go and sit in the kitchen and she'd look through the curtain, staring onto my dad's back. We kids would sit on the couch, one next to each other, still, and very quiet. And my dad would watch TV. And we 3 young kids would sit very still and very quiet. No talk would go on. In fact, if you felt you really needed to speak, if you wanted a glass of water, if you wanted to go to the toilet, you would hold it in as long as possible. And when it finally burst through, you would say it as quick as possible. Then you'd look to see if you were going to be either told off or sent out for speaking. You'd hear that intake of breath. And then calmly and quietly you would say, "Get out," in the coal cupboard. So up you go, flicking your eyes across your sisters and brothers who were still on the couch. And as you walk to the hall and put yourself in the coal cupboard, it was pitch black in the coal cupboard and usually half full of coal, which was on a slant, so you struggled to get your feet flat on the floor, so you're always in awkward positions. You felt safe, but obviously you thought of ghosts standing behind you and spiders crawling. And also you never had an idea how long you were going to be in there for, so the main aim was to always try and get comfortable. Be pitch black and then a crack of light and the door would open. Usually it was Mark putting himself in the coal cupboard. Mark, I think, was quite a nervous type of kid, and he found it really difficult to keep his laughing. And I think that was more through nerves than finding things funny, but probably a bit of both. So he'd try and contain himself, and by way of doing that, he'd flick his foot with a slipper on the end with the speed of light up and down. It was amazing what he could do with this foot and the slipper on the end. He could do figure eights and everything. He could go up and down. Well, my dad used to catch the action out the corner of his eye, and it used to infuriate him. Keep your foot still. So when he kept his foot still, he'd have to try and contain his giggle, but then his nerves would kick in. So again, trying not to laugh, he'd open his mouth slightly and he'd try and let all the air inside, which was getting ready to laugh, out of his throat. So it sounded like a menacing, drawly moan. Well, that was worse than laughing. It sounded like a goal, and then everybody else would get a little bit giggly. And then you'd hear, "Coal cupboard." Sometimes we'd all be in there, and then my mum would let us out after a reasonable amount of time. My dad never let us out, and he probably would have left us there forever if we didn't try our hand. So gingerly would re-enter the living room. And sometimes the nerves would set in and you get 2 feet in the living room and then you'd have to turn around and go back out and go in the coal cupboard because you knew that you couldn't contain your laughter. And Mark's nervousness and his ooh usually meant us doing a turn around. It sounds strange now looking back. And most of the time we were trying to hold in laughter, either through awkwardness, nerves, or trying to make the other laugh so they're the one who got the attention and got shouted at. Often we'd go in and sit on the couch and my dad would still be staring at some boring programme on the news, and my mum would still be sitting staring at the back of my dad's head, would look at us and pull faces at him. Through the daytime, me and my siblings fought like cat and dog. But at night time it was a different story, and at night time we clung on to each other. It was obviously not the best of times, but at the same time, it was. My mum made it normal. She laughed in the daytime, she made us laugh, and she gave us strength through the day to cope with the latter. All week, they would hardly say 2 words to each other. The normal routine was my dad would either come in from work, have his dinner, then go for the pub for a few pints and come back late, go to bed, go to work, have his dinner and go to the pub, which was normally a relief when that happened, and that was quite his normal routine. But the times when he was watching his penny, he'd come and he'd stay in, so of course that spoilt our evening. And my mum would have to fetch an 8-pint tin of bitter from the off-licence and a quart bottle of Bell's the Teacher's whiskey. More often than not, I would grab the opportunity to go with my mum to see if I could get any little treats like sweets or nuts, because sometimes she'd give in. And we'd climb up Hill Street, which must have been about a mile walk really, and it was all uphill to the off-licence. And then if she thought she could get away with it, she'd sneak me crisps or if she wanted to wind me dad up and not give him all the change, she'd sneak me Chris. So one of two things. This would depend upon the mood she was in or how she felt. When I think back, 8 pints she would carry all the way back, and she was a scrawny, tiny thing. You'd never ask for anything. You just look and hope and not be sad if you didn't get anything. A little bit further along from the off-licence was Garrett's sweet shop. And if I was given any bits of pennies from the change, I'd go along and I'd just stand just inside the door. And it'd be a while before I'd ask for anything, because I'd be looking round. They had big boxes of toys and big jars of sweets, and they were all on shelves high up, and they were only for people who could afford it. And I used to stand there and watch and think, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in Garrett's. People will think I'm loaded. And I'd look round wistfully at all the comics and the plastic toys, and other people would come in and I'd just stand and stare. Then we'd go back home. My dad would settle down for the night drink, and my mum would take a chair in the back kitchen, looking through, just staring and animately smoking a cigarette with the rollers in. Now the weekends come, that was a different story. They'd both be smiley happy come Saturday morning, because they knew come Saturday evening they'll be getting the glad rags on and heading for the Davy Lou Social Club. We kids would have our tea, and we knew that was going to be a little bit of a happy time. We had a few hours while my mum and dad were out to be kids, and we'd all be chilled and the atmosphere would be pleasant. My dad would stand in front of the mirror with his crown and glory coiffed to perfection. He'd hold another mirror at the back of his head to make sure the bald spot was covered. He was quite a tricky dresser when he had the big collared shirts and the 70s wide ties, quite sure of himself, and he'd whistle. And his mood would be lifted as he nimbly moved throughout the flat. And sometimes we kids would try to persuade one another, go and ask him for the pocket money while he's in a good mood. But we learned that this could change so quickly, so mostly we didn't. Usually we stood more of a chance if he was tipsy, so we'd wait for that moment. It didn't come weekly, just the tipsy part. That come weekly. So pocket money was sporadic. And my petite little mum would squeeze into the smallest and tightest of knee-length pencil skirts with a wide wasby belt, and she'd curl her short hair. Then she'd bend down in front of me, close her eyes. She'd be that close I could smell the pants stick and the lipstick, and she'd say, Trey, how does my eyeliner look? Is it straight? And I'd look and I'd watch how they fell into the creases and how the ends were not perfect, and I'd say, yeah, they're fine, because after all she wore glasses, she'd never know that it wasn't fine. And also I'd be thinking, no one's going to be looking at you, you're old, it really doesn't matter. Looking back now, my mum could have been no more than 33 at the time. My mum had always worn glasses all her life, so putting on the eyeliner was no easy feat. Then they both go off, happy and ready for a good night. And we kid would watch whatever we wanted, normally Hammer House of Horrors, because that's what everyone looked forward to. Sometimes there'd be lemonade and crisps as a treat, and when they went out, but not very often, maybe twice a year. And although we always hoped that we'd be getting lemonade and crisp, it didn't seem to matter that we didn't, because what we had was a night to ourselves. Then the time had come close to when my mum and dad was home, and Hammer House of Horrors would have just finished. And sometimes it'd be later than others, but you'd hear clip, clop, clip, clop, clip, clop. So we'd rush into the bedroom and look like we'd been in bed all night, which they probably knew we hadn't, but anyway, that's what it looked like. Then the key would go in the door. Me, Sharon and Mark would be lying there in bed, eyes wide, lights off, listening. Sheets pulled up tight round our chins. No one would say anything, but with ears pricked, we'd listen and listen, and we wouldn't fall asleep. Then we'd be thinking, are they arguing? Were they going to go straight to bed? Was it going to be a good night? Then you would hear it warm up. You'd listen to the ferocious little hateful words being said. Sometimes my mum would seem to ignite it, sometimes my dad would just want to hit out. Would lie in bed and would listen, Listen to the volume rise. Listen as to when would be the point when we'd have to run in. Is it going to settle? Is it steadying? Then the screams, the thuds would start and the bangs would be bouncing off the wall, things would smash and bodies being bashed round. Still without speaking, we'd all dive up and race towards the door to get in between my mum and my dad. My mum usually being the one to be barricaded by children's bodies from the blows. Afterwards, you'd see my dad cry and move away once the adrenaline subsided. And my mum would be sitting there with bitter words towards my dad, normally saying something like, "Ignore him, he's a bastard." The fights were very physical, punching, head banging, scratching, black eyes, which seemed to be the norm, and she'd cover it up and then ask us if you could see it. I think both my mum and dad made attempts to contain themselves somewhat physically, but their attempts were never hard enough, and they never hit it enough when we were around. And our interrupting them would eventually aid the fighting to stop. However, I think we'd seen enough to be afraid and to fear the next one. I remember one time going up to my dad and telling him I felt sorry for him and I had no one to hug afterwards. And he just semi-smiled and nodded, but he didn't reach out for a hug, but instead he remained contained within his own sadness. I was always confused why no one showed my sadness for my dad as much as they did my mum. I felt sad for him being left out, but I didn't feel sad for him, if that makes sense. We'd all approach Sunday apprehensively, then it would be Monday, and the week would follow. My mum would continue to go for the £8 tin of beer and sit and stare resentfully at my dad's back, and my dad would come home from work and command silence and watch TV. The weekend would arrive, the glad rags would go on, and the night out would happen and the old cycle would begin again. Mum would chunt her about my dad being a hooer, if that's even a word. Anyway, what she meant was that he was a womaniser, and many times after an argument my dad would disappear for days, sometimes weeks. My mum would shout and scream about him having love bites and lipstick marks all over him, followed by a few obscenities. I'd have been grown up at the time, put two and two together. Of course, my dad was playing round, and he was playing round often. The area in which we lived was about a 2/3 split Catholic and Protestants. The school St Patrick's we went to was Catholic, and I remember as a toddler my mum would take me up to register to join the infant school. I think it was a long-awaited relief for my mum as I was thrown out of nursery. The Davy Lou nursery, I remember it well for the 3 days I attended. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed playing with everybody, and they had a gym and I could climb round. But this one day, I watched a nasty boy sat in the sandpit, and he wouldn't let anybody else in the sandpit, so he had the sandpit to himself. So the next day when I went, I thought, right, I'm having the sandpit to myself. So I'd done the same thing. Only why that boy got to stay at the Davy Lou nursery, I got thrown out. And the next thing I knew, there was my mum yanking my arm, pulling me up the street, and she's saying, "You didn't want to go there anyway, did you, babe? It's a shite nursery anyway."